I just think it's so powerful that here in Acts chapter 8, the very guy that was dragging people out of homes and having them persecuted because they said yes to Christ, in Acts chapter 20, verse 21, in chapter 20, verse 20, he's the very one that's going into homes. And he's having studies, and he's teaching the Word of God, and he's praying for healing and new life. What a huge contrast. As if to say, God can radically change and transform your life. You see, that's why Paul says, I've got to go to Jerusalem. Even though I'm going to face trials, even though I'm going to face suffering, this beautiful, wonderful, life-changing message of God has got to go out. It's just got to go out. It's not about me. But I live for a greater purpose. And that's why there's meaning and purpose in my life, is because I live for God. When you and I decide to fully live for God and fully surrender, you and I will have more meaning and purpose than we ever dreamed possible. Scales fell from his eyes because Paul did an all-out surrender. But you and I have to be careful, because there's so many voices that are trying to speak to you and me today, and so many voices that are getting the attention of our youth and our young folks, and so many people are dealing with pain and suffering. I mean, I came across these statistics again this past week, and it troubled me as I began to realize that so many people in America today are listening to so many other voices, and it's causing great disturbance, and it's causing great anxiety and worry and depression in the life of our youth, our teens and tweens, as well as people in their middle ages. In their middle age and their time of life when they're supposed to be enjoying life, and yet they're riddled with depression and worry and anxiety. It says over 40 million adults in America today from 18 on are suffering from anxiety disorders in our country. Folks, that's a huge percentage of the population. And that doesn't include the fact that 31.9% between the ages of 13 and 19, 31, a third of our youth are suffering from anxiety disorders in our country today. They're riddled with fear, they're riddled with anxiety and worry and depression. Why are so many of us in our family, our friends, co-workers, classmates, and many others dealing with depression and worry and feeling worthless, feeling so worthless because of all the struggles that they have to contend with? In our one-year Bible reading this past week, it just became evident. It's like God was answering why so many of our young people and older adults as well are struggling with a sense of worthlessness. So here in 2 Kings, verse 15, it tells us that we are to turn from our evil ways, obey my commands and decrees and the entire law that I command your ancestors to obey. Verse 14, but the Israelites would not listen. They were stubborn as their ancestors who had refused to believe in the Lord their God. And now verse 15, they rejected his decrees and covenant he made with their ancestors, and they despised all of his warnings. Now let's read this next part first. Let's read this together. Ready? Here we go. They worshiped worthless idols, so they became worthless themselves. Whew. They worshiped worthless idols. You know, the worst idol of all happened in Genesis 3. When the tempter came to Eve and said, you won't die if you eat of that fruit. If you eat of that fruit, you'll be just like who? God. And your eyes will be opened. And we've wanted to play God ever since. The worst form of idol worship is when we worship ourselves.